Great, everybody. It's good to see everybody in the room. It's been 8 months now. I think we've been working together. We finally get to shake hands and see everybody. So that's really exciting to have everybody here in the room. I'll turn over to David for a minute, and then I think we'll just go around and do an introduction so we can put things in face and see each other outside the little boxes on the screens. And welcome.
Yeah, just generally welcome. Thanks everybody who traveled to get here. We know that there's not a given the geographic spread on where everyone's from. It's on our council. There's not a central place that's convenient for everybody. But Salem was a good spot to do everybody out there. Everybody came out. Same place those of us that made it. And we'll try and do it again for any folks that are with us online and when they make it out. But again, thank you for all the hard work getting us through this far in the process. Thank you.
Great. And I think we'll start. Maybe Senator Drummond, you want to start?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jama, 24 hours East Portland and Northern Projects Company.
Senator Dick Anderson from the coast and District 5.
Senator Maxine Dexter, Portland, Northwest, and Winston, District Park. Everyone, Elizabeth Ertler, Tassau County, Housing Manager.
Amber Flanagan, with Peter Homes and work group chair for land availability.
I'm Daniel Munn, I represent Southern Oregon, and I'm teaming up Ivory on finance.
Good afternoon, everyone. Brenda Bateman, I'm the director for the Department of Land Conservation and Development.
JD Tubby, Tribal Planning Director for another 4 hours, and then I just got appointed to the Deputy Executive Director at the C2IR. Sorry. More stats. So.
All right, David Hall, the other co-chair, attorney, real estate communities.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Vera Bell, Shiva Pronouns Executive Director of Oregon Housing and Community Services. Really good to be in person community with everybody.
Ivory Matthews, I'm the CEO for Home Forward. We do houses that they use for Montgomery County. And I'm also a co-chair of the Finance Committee, the best committee there is. Pleasure to see everybody.
Justin Wood, builder from Portland, primarily focusing on entry-level middle housing product, and that tends to be what we mostly build. And happy to be here.
Well, former mayor of Ontario, Oregon, and member of the Eastern Oregon Workforce Authority, founding member of Oregon of Maui County Poverty and Prosperity, and a has-been builder developer.
Garrett Olson, builder developer, Mid Willamette Valley, build master plan communities. Also the chair of the plan committee.
Rob Justice, with Home First, we have to build exclusively affordable housing across the state. We're from Ontario to the coast, metro area. And I'm very proud to be on the finance committee.
Erica Mills, CEO of NeighborWorks Sunflower, we're an affordable housing provider, developer, owner, manager in Southwest Oregon, and I'm the chair of the Workforce Shortages Group.
Natalie Janney, I'm a civil engineer at Multitech Engineering here in Salem, representing the Mid Willamette Valley. We do primarily market rate subdivisions and multifamily developments, and I am the chair of the Codes of Design.
My name is Tom Cody. I'm the president of a company called Project. We have offices in Portland and Bend. We do a lot of different kinds of work. We built the Oregon headquarters for the Nature Conservancy. We recently built a headquarters for Milam Memorial Trust. And mostly now I'm focused on workforce housing, middle income housing across the state. It's so good to be with you all in person and see you. It's a pleasure.
Margaret Van Vliet, recovering bureaucrat. All around, apparently representing the metro area. But and I'm proud to be on the finance under the fabulous leadership of Ivory.
Good afternoon, everybody. Matthew Shaw, Governor's office. It's good to see you. I'll pass it over to Cory.
Thank you all. My regrets not being there in person, last minute conflict prevented me from driving, but here, Gory, principal at Sarah Architects. We've been around in Portland for 58 years, working on sustainability and housing of all kinds, affordable, deep affordable, and market rate, all sorts of development. So very happy to be here.
Joel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joel Matson, the Executive Director of the Mid-Columbia Housing Authority and Columbia Cascade Housing Corporation. We promote and administer affordable housing solutions in Hood River, Wasco, and Sherman counties in Oregon, as well as Klickitat and Skamania counties. I guess if we're giving excuses, I apologize for not being there in person, but happy to participate remotely. We had a big application, 2 of them actually due in our Washington service area today that I needed to stick around for and finish up, but glad to participate virtually with you all.
HPAC members with us virtually.
Go ahead. I want to introduce that as well. Do you have one?
Yeah.
We've been by teaching for pronouns as in
Sam Thomas, Eden Pronouns, I am a workforce programs with the higher education coordinator division.
Tia Croman, housing policy analyst with BLCD, and I help staff.
Elise Portal Kennedy, she, her pronouns. I'm the senior research analyst at Oregon Housing, and I staff the best work, the best group ever, the finance committee, so I'm happy to be here.
We did not set out.
Ethan Stuckmeyer, I'm the manager of the housing division at the Department of Land Conservation.
My name is Maddie Valenzuela. I'm she and they pronouns, and I am a senior housing planner with the Department of Conservation.
Thank you. Do you have anybody else on the line that needs to?
We have Mitch.
Mitch.
Hey everyone, Mitch Hanush, Senior Policy Analyst with the Affordable Rental Housing Division at OHCS. Sorry I'm not there in person, feeling a little sick and trying not to be a bioweapon for this illustrious group.
From everybody, I would like to, extend our great gratitude to the staff who've been working with workers. I think it's an enormous amount of work. So I give you a quick round of applause for all the work you guys have been doing. That wraps us up with the welcome and consent agenda. I'm really happy. Yeah, speaking of. So that puts us into some any updates, I think, from you, or do we want to go right to this first round?
No, I can go ahead. So just for the members of the public who might not be aware, and I guess a reminder for council members who may have forgotten, the HPAC process is that the work groups are diving into various barriers or potential solutions to housing production that were identified in the plan framework. There are 5 work groups, as everyone knows, and the work groups develop potential recommendations. Those are brought before the full HPAC, and there's a kind of a 3-step process. First is a reading, first reading to introduce the overall potential recommendation. Then there is a public comment meeting, and then finally discussion and vote. If a recommendation is adopted, it is adopted as a preliminary recommendation. And at the end of this year, the council will take a look at the totality of the recommendations and decide what to include in the final plan and final recommendation report to the governor for consideration.
Okay, thank you for that. So we just go into the HPAC recommendation review process, got that covered. So introduction of potential recommendations from work groups. So let's do first reading. We'll just jump right into the first one. Daniel and Ivory, the SDS recommendation.
Yeah. So everybody at finance told you we're awesome because we're all tap dancing around the fact that I think we submitted at least another recommendation. They're just really complicated and controversial. This one's pretty straightforward though, so we're happy to bring it here to the first reading. So this is as we dug into it, we all know that STCs were identified as a huge barrier or the preliminary round. And as finance has talked to SMEs, talked to jurisdictions, talked to developers, it's become very, very apparent that infrastructure funding on the government side is a huge hurdle. So this is a simple solution that tries to tackle both of those problems. So the proposal in front of you would have the state set up a loan facility for local jurisdictions to borrow against future STC revenue. And what this does is a couple of things. Number one is it allows local jurisdictions to get improvements built without having to wait for those STCs to roll in. That is something that jurisdictions can do right now anyway. You can bond against future revenues, but this is a lower transaction cost, easier way to do it. And it's in the state's interest to make sure STCs get funded. But the second thing that it helps us do is we can attack the affordability side of it by basically having subsidized interest or waive it or attach certain conditions to it. So in our recommendation, we've talked through a couple of potential options such as tying the amount of interest that you pay or your payback schedule to affordability targets, having interest waivers for the first 5 years if you're marketing towards certain goals that are under your housing analysis. And we give cities the option of either paying back with SDC revenue or waiving SDCs and attaching it as a 20-year amortized charge to the property, which could be property tax, it could be a fee in lieu. There's a couple of different ways to do it mechanically, but the finance doesn't matter. Ultimately, there are problems with SDC funding so much of our infrastructure, and we know that there ideally will be some wholesale or very major reforms of how we fund infrastructure. But that will take time and it will be a complex process. This is an excellent stopgap measure stood up very, very quickly by the executive branch and help bridge the gap between where we are today and maybe where we'll be with a better infrastructure plans. So a lot of people on the committee have their hands in this. Eric took the lead. Is there anything that I missed? I agree anything that that's the high level. If that would stand your question, we'll take on public comment at the next meeting.
Great. Any questions for the finance team? Yeah, you can add,
And for this definition, it says SCP, the fund constructing of the building units, we could be SCP. Is there any talk about?
We just have the two HPEC members that this guy here introduce themselves, so folks, representative.
Representative Helfrich from Housing Justice for a short more minute before I get busy with another piece.
Karen Rockwell, Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Buckhead County.
Is there any discussion about delaying, recommendation to delay the payment of SCC, so it could be delayed maybe until certificate of occupancy or 18 months after bereavement, whichever happens first?
We talked about that. And we've asked some of the SMEs that come in. There are jurisdictions that offer that. A lot of times people don't go for it for some reason. And what the jurisdiction we're worried about is the ability to collect. Personally, I think that's probably overblown. Your government wants to collect, but nobody wants to go to a house with a family that's moving into it and say, we're yanking your C above. So this helps get around it. So basically you're taking that credit risk off of the city and you're putting it on the state. So we can delay the payment of it. Let's say we do the program and say it's delayed, you pay it 2 years later. The state has fronted the money for the local jurisdiction. Now it's up to the state to recover it, and the state's taking on that forced action. What local jurisdictions don't like is they don't have the lead tracking ability, they don't have the staff or the political willpower to go try and check on it. So we're trying in a roundabout way, this can address what you're bringing up
Yeah, it just seems like, to allow builders to not have to carry the cost of SDCs through the construction of the unit would be another way to lower.
Would make sense. And if you're a city and you get the money up front and it's like 0 interest for the first 5 years, you should be indifferent to when the developer pays it. There is a good argument for paying at occupancy, but it doesn't drag on. people, so.
So I just to add to that, if we kick that around anymore, or if it comes out as another recommendation, then eventually, Portland actually has I think, a pretty good model mechanism for how to do this. It's not an occupancy, I mean, it's not a certificate of occupancy, because that does make it a little bit harder to track, but they do it at transfer of title. And so right now in Portland, they have a program that if we defer our SDCs, they actually put a lien on the title, so the city doesn't have to track it. When I go to sign to close my paperwork, there's a restriction right on the title. It can't be cleared until the title company repays the city the SDCs. So I've heard the city say, because we've had these conversations too, that they don't have the tracking ability, but they don't really need the tracking ability if they just do it as a lien on title, the way some others, and that's actually, Washington State does this already. They allow you to do it, and that's what they do too, so.
And then the question, do they get a first priority lien when they do that, or do they have to subordinate construction lenders?
So
it's come up as lenders get squishy about it.
Yeah, it has been discussed, but I haven't seen it come up, knock on wood. I mean, I use it all the time, and my construction lenders haven't had an issue with it, and so.
It's an education.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I think there's something to mind is that money goes into a silo, can only be used for certain things, which is collected. Well, there's a 10-year window to use that money. So how does that work if you don't transfer title for 8 years or 9 years? How does that work, that window? The 10-year window to use that money once it comes in.
Well, in our case, like, what Portland does is, because there is always a small chance that it doesn't transfer title, I just decide to keep it. Or I limit it myself, or whatever I'm gonna do with it. But in Portland's it's only interest free it stays on title, and it's only interest free for, I think, up to 18 months. And then after that, it starts hitting you with quite a lot of interest. So in theory, it could stay on there for several years, but at some point when I transfer title on it, it's gonna now be, instead of being a $10,000, $15,000 SDC, it's gonna be like a tax, it's gonna be a $40,000 SDC by the time you go to sell your property. So it's not very advantageous for somebody to do that. And sure, there's examples of that happening, but they're pretty few and far between.
Did you have something, Gary? I saw you come off camera, your camera came back on. I don't know if anybody else online has any comments either. No. Any other comments?
Well, I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
Okay, so the chance of title transferring on low-income housing projects is a 40 or 50-year obligation. What is the advantage of ever paying it off? Because you're never gonna realize anything out of it.
So the way this recommendation is written, it doesn't go down the lead route, buying the title of the property. It goes either, you gotta pay the SDC at some point, CFO or something similar, or you pay it over 20 years as you can move or through the property tax system. But any way you get to it, the government has to have a effective security interest and attorney, is that what I want?
Yeah, okay. Transfer of title is one thing, but if it's not for sale housing. For conversion, construction, permanent financing, without that. There's a couple ways to do it for different types of products. But it sounds like y'all have proposed a one size fits all.
We've kept it high level on purpose to get in the weeds really quickly. This might not work for every jurisdiction. It's not a cure-all. But like I said at the beginning, there needs to be a significant reform to how we fund infrastructure and how we do SDCs. So this is really a Band-Aid measure to quickly roll out money for infrastructure, release some SDC pressure while we work through a better system. So
I think the point though, generally is a good one that obviously fashion this recommendation to optimize it to decrease the kind of collection related loss related risk to the state. What is the kind of optimal mechanism is, and then questions about does it get baked into the state program or does it get state and local together and focus on wash here and that type of thing. So
but at the end of the day, the public policy point that there's a little bit of loss, but it's lost that the government built roads and sewers. And at the end of the day, that's not a horrific loss. If we lose a little bit of money, but we built infrastructure and got housing out of it, I think there's got to be political balance necessary. versus saying everything's related to security interests. But that's about my take.
I didn't want to read anything, all I wanted to do.
I've been waiting to be in person. Looking forward to this whole.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I feel that.
Yeah, we're good. Are there any other comments, questions for the finance team? Presentation. Okay, we are way ahead of schedule, so I didn't know if Matt and I were messaging back and forth. Do you want to? We had some appearances before the Senate and the House, so I don't know if we maybe take a second and do an update on that.
Yeah, that would be great.
The HVAC roadshow.
I can tee it off, so, we happen to have the chairs and vice chairs that House and Senate policy committees that are focused on housing, homelessness, and development. So, as always, thank you for being here, your time. And they invited in the co-chairs this week. It's interim legislative days, I suppose, if you didn't know. And so the legislators in town having committee meetings, talking about the issues. And they wanted to have an update for their committees on the HPAC process. And so they invited in the HPAC co-chairs to share an update. So I think it'd be great if you, both of you wanted to chat a little bit about what we updated the committee on, and then if there's any thoughts from chairs and vice chairs.
I first off, I have to apologize for being online for that. That's always a little bit awkward. But for the most part, it was mostly just the process of the HVAC and what just kind of overview timeline. And mostly process. And then I'll turn over to everything else for the give us the heart and soul of the conversation. I was just kind of procedural stuff.
Yeah, so we had the opportunity to the House committee yesterday, the Senate committee the day before that. Yeah, right. So yeah, taking that off with the process, and I think just broader, plugged in sort of into the governor's framework and set of initial 3 executive orders. What the housing production part was, I think both of those committees were also hearing from the folks doing work that's associated and comparable in the housing or in the homelessness prevention and remediation space from other 2 executive orders, and then they kind of talked underscoring sort of what was the policy images behind the executive orders, the framing of housing production, the framing of a housing production target, where that information came from, and why that is housing production as a target, although it sort of affects different communities differently. It really kind of affects all Oregonians, and the discussion looks different in all different parts of the state. And we might be talking about density differently in one place than another, but really the availability of housing and having housing choice and that sort of thing. At all levels, helps folks who are experiencing homelessness, to have options to get out of it. Folks who are experiencing housing instability have options for other than going into homelessness potentially, but we're talking about things happening. And also then at all levels of affordability upward. There's went through sort of some of the economic implications of sort of supply of housing, and so that beyond availability retention of workforce in different parts of the state and different industries that are priorities in the state, and then also to sort of keeping folks in Oregon. Like a young family that wants to buy a house, but in Oregon, wants to stay in Oregon, but can't figure out how to finance that. That they're not, housing insecure and all of those things. So kind of give the high level policy, answer the couple questions, and have a discussion about how the HPAC is really kind of intended to, put all these issues on the table and what our work process is and what we're going to do by the end of the year here, and provide the folks of the legislature and the executive branch, hopefully our best and clear-eyed policy recommendations, so that they can figure out what actually can be turned into the law of the land and implemented and all of those type of things. So that was the messaging, and we had some good conversations with members of your committees as well. And I think about the housing thing, so they're obviously interested, but I mean, there was pretty much, support around the concept of the working group and so that was good as well.
Thank you. I invite you guys to give an update or impressions or. Sorry, gentlemen.
Thank you. This presentation for the committee, we actually, I think we covered everything that we talked about, so I don't have anything that except say thank you for coming for the class. I think the only piece that I will highlight was that the committee was really interested about timeline and the process. And that's really where they spend most of their energy. In addition to the high level that is probably disqualified. So it was a really good conversation, and they were eager to hear from their community. So thank you for your.
We did want to primarily focus on process, but fully, Damien and I and others will probably be in front of you guys' committees again on the results after the first year. So look forward to those conversations too.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Go ahead.
If I can add to that, because I think it was good, and I think it's always, we assume many members know what the heck's going on and know anything about housing to begin with. And that's not always the case. So this was so, I would be honest with you and say there's some angst, because after all, this was all decided in March, and what the heck is this group been doing? It's October. So I think committees have a tendency to be legislative, we'd like some results early. So you did a good job with your timeline saying, look in December and happy reading the recommendations, that kind of stuff. But I think there's certainly, there's hope, especially when you broke down the work groups and what's going on. I think legislators were looking for a little more hints of where things are going.
Yeah.
Isn't ready.
Yeah.
I really appreciate everyone coming. I don't know if you've noticed that there's a lot of interest in what
Yes,
these types of concern and, it depends on what perspective you come from. There's some misunderstanding, I think, in the community as well as within the legislative body about what exactly is happening, what the process will be, and how these recommendations will be used. So I think it was really helpful for both of you. Thank you so much for sharing your time as well as your expertise, and then really just thanking the council, because this is really important perspective, and it is one perspective. And I think the legislative body will be taking, multiple perspectives, and ultimately this is an executive branch action and body. And so how that interfaces, I think, is really important for not just our legislators, but the public to try to understand, because it doesn't make sense to some people how all these things interface. And so I just think the more we talk about it, the more we share sort of updates, it'll be helpful. So thank you for offering it.
Right, thank you. Absolutely. And apologies if we didn't get into the details of the recommendations. There's a lot of draft recommendations to be. The ones that folks have been concerned about are still very much in draft form, and the message is really around. We would love to hear from you. Come out and give us your impressions on any of the recommendations, as opposed to details of whether or not we finally calibrated the policy of a draft recommendation and the work before, public gets to see that type of thing. So we sit a bit above the fray on that in our conversations with both of the groups. So always felt like we could bring the meat.
All right.
What I promised you really quickly, and I'm so sorry, I'm here. Is that it was really helpful. You almost had like the whisper from that. I literally attended that question about water infrastructure and subject matter experts, and literally, you were talking about it with, and I don't know if I didn't see you guys texting with each other. So, like, having you respond and address the questions that people have, like, do you have experts at the table and answering that question and being responsive and flexible, I think is really a good precedent for our committee to be seeing and understanding. And please just continue to make yourselves available, because I think that will keep the temperature down about this happening. Next.
Everyone would like to introduce. Governor of the great state of Oregon, Tina Kotek, welcome to our little.
This is where all the fun is.
Yes. it is. Well, we're
No,
just going
I-
into instructions, we're doing.
Wherever you are on the agenda, I'm trying to interrupt.
Well, what we're doing right now is mostly just legislative updates, just our presentation that we did to the Senate and the House. And we're talking to the chairs of both the House committees and both houses. So we're just mostly just doing a legislative update and kind of like where we're at and what we're kind of doing. We're just kind of wrapping up with that. But I think to that point, I think to kind of follow up on that point, one thing that I've kind of done in East Northern my travels is kind of explain that this is to kind of explain what we are and what we're doing, because we're kind of like a research think tank that is kind of like bringing a bunch of stuff together. I've said, you know, we've created all these rules over the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and we owe it to the state of Oregon, we owe it to the taxpayers to make sure we're evaluating those rules, to see if they're actually hindering housing production. We don't want to weaken environmental rules. We want to make sure those rules don't hinder housing. So how do we actually improve those rules in order to make those rules work better to not only do what they're intended to do, which is protect the environment and those things, but also not hinder housing production in some way. So, but again, this is a research think tank. It's like we're kind of pulling together a bunch of recommendations across the entire board and then presenting to the governor. And then we hope that it comes into a large bag of options that can be either through the governor's office or just even by local jurisdictions. So local jurisdiction might be able to say, that's a good idea that we can institute. And then, you know, improving permitting time, improving some kind of local recommendations that they might be able to take on. So we hope it's usable across all scales in the state of Oregon.
Just real quickly, in Vice Chair of Housing Homelessness for probably another half an hour or so. I appreciate the governor's convening this work group and the understanding that we have to look at how we're doing production and all the tools that we need to bring to the table to do that. And Chair Dexter and myself, we worked really closely together early in session for the ONA bill and putting that in 2001. And I learned a ton of that from housing, but the group here and the work that you're doing is so important. And I appreciate that because I've been in and out and drifting in the different meetings and stuff. And I really appreciate the perspectives that are here, because unless you have everybody at the table, I mean, not sure what the table's supposed to be like and how big it is, you don't understand all the issues that are there. And so I just want to say thank you for everybody for that. For those who don't know, I was elected leadership in the Republican Party, so I'm now the leader of the House Republican Party, and so I have a different role. But I just want to say, take a chance to say you did an awesome presentation for us. We really appreciate that. But also want to sit here and say thank you to Chair Dexter and her nice relationship that we had. I really appreciate that. There's never any surprises. We were always very upfront in how we're doing the things, and this is kind of the same way I see here in this HPAC. And I really appreciate the friendship that we were there, Senator John and Senator Anderson. Everything that we did, because I walked into a world of housing and didn't really know what it was about or didn't how to build one. And now I know all the backstory. It's kind of interesting. So all that said, I could go to transportation meeting here in a moment, but I want to say thank you for all you guys' hard work. I look forward to seeing what the final product is and helping get that across the finish line in the House. The Senate, well, they got to work some more work. So
The new leader is gonna do a mind meld for you in the new replacement.
yeah, good for you.
The famous message and operation, congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Governor, would you like us to go do a quick round, just to get names and where we're from, perhaps? Does that work for you?
Yeah, I'm good. I went back and so again.
You know, okay.
Yeah, I'm good, but thank you.
I don't know, do you want Matt, or I don't know what? Absolutely.
Where are we in the agenda? I don't know.
We're in a good place.
Are you ready to be?
Yeah, we're ready to go to that. I don't, so I don't know, I've been trying to do all this a little.
I was thinking that, sorry.
No, yeah.
Right.
I don't think it's scheduled, so it's like, oh, 4 minutes ago.
Yeah.
No.
It's really, I'm just enjoying being in the room. I gotta be honest. I hope you like being with each other in person. When you jumped into doing the work of this council, you know, in the early days, you're all sitting on a Zoom. So I'm just pleased that we have an in-person meeting. Because it gives me an opportunity to just really thank you. That's number one. You never know when you pick a group of individuals to take on a very large task, how people are going to engage, right? Everybody has their lives, but you know, the level of commitment, our co-chairs, the chairs of the committees, every member, the agency folks who are supporting, frankly, the public, right? People have been weighing in, when there's public comment period. I'm like, we have a lot of people engaged on the topic of housing production. And we need you all to be successful. When we started HPAC back in January, there wasn't a preconceived destination. We just know we needed to go on the journey. And we needed people around the table to bring their expertise and say, here are all the things that we should consider. And again, I like this idea of like a think tank, right? Every idea might not have the same importance as another idea. And not every idea is ready for prime time, maybe right now. But we have a land use system that says we will protect what we value and we will have housing. And we have been having some great conversations with the LCD. It's like, I even was joking, I have my, you know, my t-shirt from the 50th anniversary, right? I believe in this. And we don't have an organ if people can't have a place to live too. So housing production, you know, is the number one priority for me going into the February session. I think it's a bipartisan priority. We just had a conversation yesterday with both House and Senate Republican leaders and the presiding officer, Senate President and Speaker, about let's have a successful 2024 session. Let's make sure housing production is a priority. And I think all the conversations and hard work you're putting into this is, and I caught the tail end of this, the more we get everyone's voice to the table and be honest and not say we're trying to blow up anything, but say we have to consider everything. I think the temperature is coming down and people are actually asking hard questions of each other. That's exactly what we need to do. This is a crisis. We need more production. No question about that. I visited now 29 of Oregon's 36 counties. I can tell you, housing comes up in every conversation. Workforce housing, low-income housing, any kind of housing you need, just housing to build the property tax base, the entire range of things that we are just not doing well in the state. But I'm eternally hopeful that we will do better. This isn't an exercise in intellectual curiosity. This is an exercise for an action plan to move us forward. And next year's session has to be about policy changes, even if they're short term, money, talking about investing in the things we need to do, from redesign to, you know, actually helping for the financing of things, and strong private sector involvement, right? The public sector will not do it by itself. It's just not going to happen. There's not enough money on the public side for us to just build all, and that's not going to happen. And housing as a public good has a very strong private sector component. They need to be part of the solution here. And I think everything you're working on is going to get us there. I think one of the things we're hearing about a little bit is how do we get ready for the short session and have your full report done? The way I think about it is there are some key issues that are bubbling up that are going to look, you know, are kind of the core starting point for both legislative concepts and budget investments. But there's time to add more as we get closer to session. So it's not an either or, but we need to start somewhere. So as we start thinking about a legislative concept, you know, legislature, they have these deadlines. You know, like you need to have your thing in by this time, and we got to work on their timeline. But I need you to bring it all the way to the end, get to the full set of recommendations, even if not everything is getting drafted on day one. That doesn't mean it's not valuable to the whole conversation. So I just want to put that out there. And yesterday I did some media conversations. We talked about some ideas need more time. They're much more complex. I'll just throw one out. The conversation about wetlands. And it does come up. And that one's more complicated than the average bear, right? So we want to do, that's not something I think we talk about next year, but it's something we're going to continue to talk about to make sure we're getting it right. Again, to the co-chair's comment about we love our land use system and the environmental protections have to be successful with the housing needs that we have in the state. I think I'm just kind of curious if you have any questions, you know, I'm really, you know, Matt keeps me well bent, you know, he's like telling me everything. And I just one other thing. This is a executive legislative endeavor. The legislators who've been involved, I gotta say thank you. You are going to be those communicators with your colleagues when it comes down to across the street, and we actually have to pass bills and get some money spent. I think we have to do everything we can to obtain one-time money to move us forward, in addition to ongoing money. Because when we talk about our homelessness crisis in our state, we're working really hard to build, to put people into shelter, transitional shelters, so they can get into housing. But this, I don't want to be the person who just builds shelter after shelter after shelter. We need a stronger network. We're doing that. We're gonna have a better baseline of shelter and transitional services. People need a place to go. They need a place to live. And so this is, if you want to talk about homelessness, then you have to talk about this. That's your job. So, any questions for me or Matt, anything you think I need to touch with?
Questions from the group?
Yeah.
Comment. A lot of our money, the big spends comes from section 42, low income housing tax credit. Canada State as a tree. I did, I think 4 when it first came out, pretty much able to do it on the phone. So the hand is treated as state, and the section 42 gives the state a lot of authority on what they want to do. So when they get a hold of it, they start putting all these declarations on the tree, starts getting really loaded down with declarations to the detriment of housing. It restricts housing production by putting all these declarations on it. You know, now you get a stack of papers this deep applying for a loan. And that seems to be that maybe there should be a committee to get in the weeds and help the state shrink that down, increase production, because low income housing production housing is the most expensive housing that you can put together, the very most expensive because of the process. Second thing is that we need more workforce housing. We need to move towards move the guidelines out so that we can get some financing for workforce housing. I hear that over and over. And my community is true, very true, because I live on the. So when I say get in the weeds, I'm from Ontario. 9% of the weed was sold right over there. It got me under. So anyway, those are my comments.
Thank you. Two things in response. I don't know if this will make you feel good or bad, but there is a lot that government does, and I'm just going to speak about state government. Things accrue over time, and there's always good intent for this or that gets added to the tree, for example. And I won't talk about housing, let me just talk about child. So we put a lot of regs in place and we put all these things that we require, and they had real good reasons behind them. And so we have to sometimes sit back and say, do we still need these things? Are they achieving the goals that we needed? And I think you have to do that on a regular basis. And sometimes we just don't do that well in government. And so when it comes to housing, it's got to be less complex. It just has to be, like, because complexity adds cost. Complexity adds confusion. And there are certain goals that when there's a significant amount of public money involved, we have to make sure we're, you know, serving people equitably, making sure that all parts of the state are served well. So there are goals there that we have to maintain. So I think looking at all those ornaments is very valid to do, and then understand we're probably gonna still need some of those ornaments, but maybe we could just make it a lot easier, cleaner looking tree, you know, to, you know, get to what we need to do. On the piece of workforce, again, on the listening tour, this is a big deal everywhere. People can't bring people into the community, even at well-paying jobs, to do core functions in communities around the state. What I have been impressed by is the level of innovation on the ground and what people are trying to do. You know, to stand in John Day, talking about how they set up an urban renewal area and they're bringing in a 3D printer up a hill to build, first time homes. I'm like, this is incredible stuff, right? People are really trying to think differently about how they're putting housing on the ground. And for folks who have been doing sticks and bricks, like that's not going to be important as well. But if we just do the same thing we've been doing, we're not going to produce that housing. So we need all kinds of new choices as well, with financing and production wise, to get that housing done. And our job as a state is to make sure we're a financing partner on the workforce side, particularly around development. And however we're going to do that, again, I'm going to say, we're going to come, legislators. We're sitting on a bunch of reserves here. I can't think of a better thing to spend one-time money on our state right now, out of our reserves, than get in the pots of money we need to get housing off the ground faster. So we all have to be supportive of saying that money should not be sitting in the bank. We gotta put people to work and get housing going. And I think we can do it. I think we are better situated than we have been over the last couple of years to have some money to do. So. Jeff is all in for that. Other comments, quick.
I might just add, I mean, it's really interesting, this idea, we've been grappling with it a lot. This idea that, we've kind of historically had this construct case for infrastructure. And kind of like flipping the script on that, and we're all coming to the realization, I think, now that you set us on this voyage, housing is infrastructure. And maybe it's kind of like the most fundamental piece of infrastructure. Like if you don't have that, how can you get the kids ready for school? How can you remain, get to your job fresh and ready to roll and all those kinds of things. So I think that's like a big part of our thinking. And I think you're going to see things like infrastructure investments and different ideas for infrastructure that can help kind of de-burden housing. So kind of like a housing first thing, not to steal that from homelessness, but
Careful now, Tom.
The other thing is when you set us on this voyage, and I hate to say this, but the metrics that were kind of set out there in terms of production, those are kind of antiquated already. And I think, interest rates have doubled in the time since we started this work practically. And I hate to say it, but the housing crisis is just going to get worse. And so our deficit is going to be greater. So maybe just like we all I think just need to amp up our ideas in accordance with that. But very thankful.
Yeah, I have to say the timing does feel even more critical than it did, beginning of the year.
I've been serving on the local land committee because I like land. I like land. We all like land. We need land.
That's good.
That's good, but it doesn't.
Unless you could get the floating homes that from Star Wars.
I mean, it's a story for people to live in. Right, Coast Guard, I mean, we can do, but I've been also working on the workforce shortages group, and so you touched on this a little bit, just in terms of the housing production industry itself, and it's not just the construction people, it's the surveyors and the engineers and the body of work of sort of an industry that we need to develop, so it's not just having money, but it's having people to deliver the money and deploy the money and use it effectively, and I sort of wonder what your thoughts are, and sort of like what might be ripe and ready around the workforce industry for housing.
I think like everything in a crisis situation, how we do workforce needs to be jumbled a bit and put on, a little bit of steroids, not to use a war analogy, but think about how when Pearl Harbor was bombed and, the Kaiser shipyard, it's just like you had workforce overnight, right? We do have to have a different speed to go on the workforce side. And when I go to high schools and we talk about, and I visit some CT, I have CT programs that I think there is a lot of potential there to bring young people into construction in a way, but the frameworks, the networks, the pipelines are not really well established. It's kind of, it's a little like, well, people will come to us. It's like, we need to go to them, right? We need to be really a lot more proactive if we're going to build that workforce. It's one of the things that really I worry about. We're going to build some new semiconductor and we're going to see a lot of skilled trades, for example, go to that. are we gonna have enough electricians to, you know, also do the residential on a timely basis, right? So, but, you know, there's the framing, there's all these other things you need folks for. I will say that we might have to have more of a boot camp mentality about the folks at the local level. I'm very cognizant of local government being really stretched thin and not having the expertise. So how do we help them get there faster? Maybe we have to be more comfortable with non-traditional pathways to get everybody up to skilled up to do this work faster. So I think we just have to put new ideas on the table there.
We can add a quick comment on that. I know when the windmills were coming in, Columbia boards, some of the community colleges up at one of the boards would have the windmill repair programs and they had almost 0% graduation rate because they wouldn't finish the program because they'd be offered a job within their first, they get halfway through the program, they offer the job. So they try to figure out how to modify the entire program so they're actually getting people the information they needed faster and quicker in order to get them deployed onto the job.
Because this is a crisis, this is an emergency, so it's like, we're not gonna, but that would take 3 years, no, not 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years.
If we do it in 12
Yeah.
months, you know.
If I may. I think anything else, yeah.
So you correctly identified this, going to take a big shot of money, both one time and maybe ongoing. On the finance committee, when we look at, there's lots of government funding programs right now. They're very risk averse. When we talk to anyone in the bureaucratic establishment, when we talk to people who write policy for them, at every layer, the number one overriding concern is how do I not get in trouble? How do we not lose a dollar? And I understand that being the guardian of public funds, but it slows things down. And the conversation we have with the finance committee is there, if we want to move quickly, if we want to unlock more private capital, if we want to get things done, there is a risk element to it. In the private business, we're used to that all the time. There's a little bit of risk we're going to take on, but it's worth it because we've done that calculus. What do you think how do you analyze the level of risk that's acceptable for the government when we get into financing massive infrastructure and housing projects?
That's not a good question, thanks.
Yeah. That's what we. The finance people, feel free to speak up. All of our recommendations come back to, if you start from the premise that we can't take any risk, we're done.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
I have
that's-
a high comfort level, so let me just put that there.
And a lot of us, we private business, we love risk. We're like, oh, that's fine. Don't prevent GM.
But that is not in the DNA of,
It's not.
I mean, it's just not, I mean, because if something goes wrong, then, you know, everybody just wants to take your head off, right? So, but there is a balance between more comfort with more risk and accountability. So our accountability structures might have to look different. But the accountability comes in a way at the back end. We spent a lot of the like risk aversion at the front end, which keeps things from happening. I mean, I generally believe most actors are good actors, so try and review the right thing. I do think the public gets skittish if it looks like we're doing more than our fair share when it comes to working with the private sector, so you have to have that balance. I want to give kudos to the agency. I mean, we're working on, one of the things is risk, and there's also other things we do, make them a lot simpler. You know, the consolidation of our financing streams is a big piece. There's risk involved in that, right? People are like, oh, can we do this? Our message ongoing with Department of Justice and our attorneys has been, it's okay, push the envelope a bit, we have to take on a little bit more risk. Because I don't think we can do it under the current structures, the way we have it. But again, also everyone needs to get, comfortable with the accountability on the back end. Like, if you break the agreement, then we're gonna come after you, right? Because, especially if there's a lot of public money involved. But I think we learned that in the pandemic, right? We took a lot of risk in the pandemic. We're still standing. Yeah, okay, maybe things weren't great in all cases, but we didn't have time to sit around and be like, well, we can't do it that way. We have to do it different. I think we have to continue that mindset in this work, so. And I want to appreciate the agency leadership, because I know it makes them nervous when I'm like, yeah, whatever, let's just try to, so.
If you keep our time, but I do want to make sure we move on the agenda, and I think it would be good to give everyone, a short break before we move into public comment. So for the members of the public, we'll be back in 5 to 10 minutes. Once folks get settled, I think breaks will take longer in person, and we'll get started.
next round is more recommendations that come for the fact. But we have,
we live and going, I guess?
good, okay, cool, sound good. So we'll have for public comment on potential recommendations from the work group. This is second reading for some of these recommendations. Scheduled from, this is continued from September 19th, and then two reads about 3:50, so we have a little over an hour to follow some of these. So we will start with top of the list. Actually, I'll turn over to Matt. I'll walk us through the process.
All right, so for the members of the public in attendance, we have a carryover sign up list from the September 9th meeting and some additional folks that have signed up. If you will read those first, we'll go in order. We'll take each recommendation in order as it is on the agenda. Given the number of people signed up, if we don't get through all of the recommendations, the public comment will carry over for the recommendations, the next meeting for the recommendations that we don't get through. So we've got some folks signed up. We'll go through them first. If you'd also like to comment, just go ahead and raise your hand and I'll call on you once we've got through the list. So the first one up is to require approval, recommendation requiring approval of certain land use, design and development adjustments for residential development. The first person signed up is Lynn Hart Hamlin.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me. My name is Lynn Handlin and I live in Happy Valley and I work and play in Portland, outer southeast to be specific. And just a tech note, I really appreciate the hybrid meeting so that I have the ability to testify, but the sound quality is really bad. And I know I know that sometimes the tech is hard and if you can't fix it next time, I totally understand. I'm just letting you know. So about this particular recommendation, I just want to say there is a housing crisis in Oregon. You all know that. There's also a climate crisis in Oregon. Some of you apparently don't understand that. And everywhere else on the planet, they are related. We must and can deal with both together. Unfortunately, so far, this board, and especially the governor, is the governor still there or is she gone? Okay.
The governor had another meeting.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so unfortunately, this board and the governor have demonstrated little or no concern or interest regarding the climate crisis, with no recognition of the fact that they are indeed related. And the governor makes it clear in her list of goals and everything else on her website, climate is literally not there. So that's bad. At the last meeting, someone on this council objected to those saying that this council is all developers, which true, not quite true. And that there was only 3 people who are developers, but that was really disingenuous of whoever said that, because the majority of the people on the board, while they may not be for-profit, high-income, whatever development, the majority of the non-legislative folks make their money on housing in one way or another. Not all, certainly, but the majority. So just putting that out there. And it's important because what's missing is those who understand climate issues, including prevention and mitigation, and also environmental justice advocates. And it shows. When all you have is a hammer, everything is a nail. And so y'all need to get some non-hammer people on board and see what happens. Gutting land use laws, which is what you've been proposing here, even though some of you say it's not, in the name of housing crisis is a false choice. We need affordable, healthy housing. Healthy, affordable housing must include consideration for current and future climate impacts and have climate mitigation built in. This means more trees, not less, more green spaces, not less, more wetlands, not less. The recommendations to force cities to give developers of all housing, not just low-income housing, but all housing. Cool, nice to see people leaving. Up to 10 variances to deviate by up to 20% from land use regulations is a huge giveaway to developers and the rest who make money on housing. With this in place, it would seriously weaken all environmental protections around land use, including 20% encroachment on greenways, and that's huge. The greenway protections are in place for good reasons, and we need to expand them in this state, especially in low-income areas, not reduce them. Do you not believe that these low-income housing, that those living in low-income housing deserve access to green spaces? I think they do. This is a human health concern as well as wildlife and more. Encroachment on the Willamette River Greenway, for example, would harm the health of the river as well as those living in the area and the wildlife. There are all kinds of studies out there showing that the land for low-income housing is there in metro areas and can be used without gutting our land use laws. So maybe, please, try that, even if it means bringing in more people that are just not here right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Next is Jennifer Kane.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Jennifer Cho Kane, and I'm a resident of the city of Portland and a community volunteer working for a healthier city and state to ensure the environment is protected and here for generations to come. It is absolutely true that we are facing unprecedented times, and the challenges of homelessness and providing quality, affordable housing for all is a must-meet priority for the state. It's important to know that houseless populations face the severest consequences of an increasingly extreme climate and the first casualties for extreme cold as well as extreme heat temperatures, as evident with Oregon's never before experienced levels of heat waves and wildfires. It is critical that as legislators, both the housing crisis and the climate crisis are addressed together and not pitted against one another. I urge you to oppose any housing legislation that scales back protections for Oregon's environment, including trees, wetlands, and other surface water and groundwater resources, environmental zones, and the Willamette River Greenway, contaminated site cleanup, and the urban growth boundary. Second, the Housing Protection Advisory Council includes the interests of development, but needs to consider the impacts that rolling back environmental protections will have on communities, and especially marginalized communities, including houseless communities. HB 3414, as it stands, the proposed bill represents the most significant bypass of urban environmental protections since the land use planning system was put in place 50 years ago, that would allow developers to bypass city codes and processes in place to protect built and natural resources. Yes, we need not only increased available of housing supply, but better utilization and partnership with existing housing options, such as available hotels and motels. We at the same time need laws that support healthy, climate resilient environments. With your openness to community input, creativity, and innovation can treat both of these crises as opportunities to address both issues. The care of our environment and the protection of Oregon's precious natural resources should not be scaled back. And along with housing options that are sustainable and addressing the needs for housing with input from houseless folks on what is needed to curb recidivism and in order to create thriving, healthy, and resilient communities. Thank you for the opportunity to give input and for your openness to community feedback. I really appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Matt, can I start to ask a question? Is the testimony just gonna be on all of the issues basically, or are they signed up to testify on issues in order that they're on the agenda?
They're signed up to testify in issues.
Okay.
Just a note to the folks giving testimony, really appreciate you coming out, spending time to speak with us. I believe we got two folks who have given well-crafted testimony, but with a lot of overlap as far as what the talking points are. To the extent the person before you or somebody else that you heard give testimony is saying something very similar to what you were saying, please feel free to reference past what they said. Also, to the extent you can, please give us direct input on draft recommendations. So at this point, we've, I think, preliminarily adopted 5 or 6 different recommendations. And all of those that have gone through the process are significantly different and have been amended when the work groups first brought them to the entire council to when we preliminarily adopt. So we're actively taking this feedback that we're getting both from subject matter experts and from the public and really encourage that. But you know, it's not saying don't speak generally, but what really helps us craft good recommendations is if we can speak to the specifics of the recommendation that you're testifying about. And that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Bob Salinger, but Bob, I don't see you on the webinar. So if you are under a different name, please raise your hand. Okay, then next is Jan Zuckerman.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, you sound great.
Great. Thank you. It's really the person that just spoke. I could barely hear what you were saying. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. My name is Jan Zuckerman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. This past August was the hottest ever recorded, 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial averages, the threshold that we are trying not to pass. And we feel it: drought, heat domes, fires, air pollution, warming waters, floods, and deaths. To survive a climate crisis, we need to increase our mitigation and commit to climate resiliency more than ever. This must be done if we're going to address the housing crisis. These two go hand in hand. If we are serious about providing homes that are safe and resilient, it would be irresponsible to remove protections for environmental zones, the Willamette River Greenway, our already dwindling wetlands, dismantle tree codes needed to grow our urban tree canopy, or push forward any expansion of the urban growth boundary. In light of this, any adjustments of up to 20% from specified land use standards goes against common sense and will cause more problems in the long run. I'm a retired teacher, but years ago I invited Dr. Ricky Ott, a marine toxicologist who was called in to help with the Exxon Valdez oil spill, to speak to our 260 middle school students. After sharing heart-stopping images of the impact of the climate crisis, she congratulated us on being alive in this place at this time, because we have the opportunity to come up with the creative solutions to address the greatest threat to life. I challenge you to do the same. Take this opportunity to not only address the housing crisis, but to see the interrelationship between climate and housing and create the kind of resilience needed to ensure that the houses we build are built in urban landscapes that are cared for and protected and center the health, safety, and well-being of those who need it the most. This will take all hands on deck. It will mean raising the bar to create lasting solutions that guide us in building more houses while protecting our natural resources. If it costs more to do this, then make it a priority. Make the impossible possible. Be transparent, broaden your commission to include the most creative thinkers and community members who will equally balance environmental and social justice issues. I hate to say this, like the housing crisis, the climate crisis is just going to get worse. Therefore, when we improve our natural resources, we improve our housing and our chances of weathering out the storm. Youth across Oregon, the nation, and the world mobilized to strike last week. They understand the connection between housing and climate resiliency. Please show them that you do too. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
Matthew, where's the microphone?
You can say it again.
Do we need to move Damien closer to it so that he can be understood?
You can project. I mean, I can go stand by the TV and say that.
We're gonna get some water.
One second, we'll get that.
So just so that, for the folks in the room, how many people do we have signed up to talk about this workshop?
We have 3 more.
Fantastic. Let's just try.
All right. Next up is Amy Pepper.
Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. I spoke at your last meeting, but just to introduce myself, my name is Amy Pepper. I'm the past chair of the Oregon Association of Clean Water Agencies. We submitted written testimony, so I will just keep this brief and specific to this recommendation. Public works standards, including stormwater design standards, are technical design documents that help to ensure the improvements are designed and constructed for the long-term operation and maintenance of our utilities by municipalities. Many of these standards must be applied in order to assure compliance with Federal Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, and FEMA floodplain management requirements. Additionally, setbacks and protected areas such as riparian buffers are important and required for the overall watershed health, drinking water source protection, and climate change resiliency for our communities. It is important to ensure that the language proposed associated with land use design and development adjustments does not apply to these types of standards that ensure our environmentally protected requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, next up, we have Dan Pauly.
Good morning, members of HPAC. Dan Pauly, Planning Manager in the city of Wilsonville. And so on behalf of the city, just wanted to share some thoughts on this particular one. This is one I've given a lot of thought to, and as I work a lot in development code and think way too much about this sort of thing. So really, our view is a more tailored, tiered approach to adjustments is needed than what is proposed. However, I do think the idea of allowing minor adjustments to different requirements without triggering a more time-consuming, costly review process is workable and has some merit. However, the blanket 20% is not workable. Much of the work needs to be done to refine this adjustment process. So, for example, there's a difference depending on what you're reviewing. The reduction of a 10-foot setback to 8-foot is a lot different than allowing like a 20% reduction of open space for a 100-acre master plan community. And also thinking about more nuances of the process should be more simple if you have a small adjustment like 5% versus a full 20% adjustment. Also, another important thing is that it needs to not just be by right. There needs to be some basic nexus to necessity or improved design. Otherwise, it's just like having a lower standard. And if they're just given out without that additional thought, in response, jurisdictions may just increase the base standard. For example, if it's automatically or almost automatically entitled, a 20-cent reduction to lot size for a 5,000 square foot lot would take it always down to 4,000. The jurisdiction may just set the standard at a higher lot size, so they end up with 5,000 square foot. Anyway, so just be aware of those nuances. Happy to talk to anyone more. I know I haven't been able to come to all the subcommittee meetings, but this is something I have a lot of interest in and happy to communicate more on this and offer our ideas and experience, because the city has had a waiver program for decades where we do allow some fairly simple adjustments and some flexibility. And so happy to offer that expertise. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Okay. Then the last person signed up. So if you did not sign up and you'd like to testify on the requiring approval of certain land use design and development adjustments, the last person is Ariel Nelson, who I do not see on the webinar. So if you're under a different name, please raise your hand. Okay, well then we have a couple people who raised their hands, so we'll go there. Next up is Michael Anderson.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you to the members of the council. I'm Michael Anderson with Skyline Institute. We are a sustainability think tank. As I did in the legislature, I would urge my fellow members of the environmental movement to read the specifics of this list. It continues to evolve. I think it's gotten better and better as time has gone on. This list of adjustments now carves out tree codes. It carves out canopy limits. It specifies we're talking about side and rear setbacks, not riparian setbacks. There may well be more ways to refine and improve this list to ensure that it's providing adequate environmental protections. But I'm here to say that the way we will achieve environmentally sustainable housing in our state, the way we will protect our resources while growing housing, is with measures like the other ones in this list, like granting flexibility on height and FAR, like simplifying the design restrictions and allowing people to get exceptions from sometimes onerous design requirements that can add uncertainty as well as cost. I really like this addition of FAR. I want to appreciate that change since the legislative session. That'll add quite a lot of flexibility. I would also add that in the spirit of Representative Dexter, who said several times in the past that this bill has, or this conceptual package has the spirit of an experiment. It continues to seem to me that we can honor that spirit of an experiment by setting a expiration date for it, a sunset date. We can do these experiments, we can learn from them, and then we can move them into our permanent law as it seems appropriate at that point. But I think that's a reasonable way to get this creative and hopefully very productive law into action. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michael. Okay. Next, we have Representative Gamba.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the hard work you're doing on this. I wanted to highlight something that was said earlier in the meeting. I believe it was by Alyssa Gertler, although I will have to agree with whoever commented on the sound for these meetings. It is extremely difficult to hear. She pointed out the fact that we have a workforce issue, and to highlight that a little more, everyone who does construction right now is doing construction. The people who build housing are building housing. So if we got a bunch of city land use policies in the name of building more housing, we still have the bottom line problem of not enough people to build significantly more housing. My concern is that we're doing this work very often for any form of housing, which is, in my mind, counterproductive towards getting more housing. The way we get more housing is to build more densely and have those construction workers building 10 units on an acre instead of 4 units on an acre. So i.e. missing middle as opposed to single family homes. And these are the kinds of things I'm really hoping this committee is going to dig into more, to think about the reality on the ground regarding workforce and what changes we can make that maximize that workforce's potential to create more housing units. I think the concerns around the environment are totally valid, and I think it's very possible to do both, to build more dense housing and to protect the environment. And I would offer that you look to the city of Milwaukee, which in a town of 10,000 current housing units is expanding 2,000 more housing units over, say, from 2 years ago to the next 2 years. That's a 20% increase in one small town, and at the same time increasing the tree canopies and protecting waterways and all of the things that the environmentalists are concerned about. Thank you for the work you're doing. I appreciate it, and I will continue to stay engaged.
Right. Thank you, Representative Gamba. So that concludes the testimony on the recommendation to require approval of certain land use design and development adjustments for residential development. We will now move to the next recommendation: temporarily modify residential land use review process standards. Again, we have a list of folks. We'll go through the list first, and then if you'd also like to testify and you haven't signed up, please raise your hand. First up is Jennifer Kane.
Yes, thank you. I previously testified and really spoke about the rolling back of environmental protections as something that I feel is really counter to providing quality housing that is increasing the supply of available housing for folks who need it, whether they're houseless folks or low income folks, or even working class and middle class folks who need housing. And encroaching on environmental protections that we need increasingly with an extreme climate, I feel really strongly is actually counter to what we need for Oregon going into the future. And so specifically the issue of, for example, in the temporarily to modify land use review standards, one of the concerns is the reduced opportunities for the public to weigh in the process. That's something that I feel like would really run counter to the types of decisions that can be made that would impact communities impacted by this decision. So I did speak to before also for the future line item around the modifying tree codes, and the one plated less than 6,000 square feet, right, where an increase in the density from the current configuration of the lot is proposed, no city or jurisdiction shall deny a permit for the removal of trees less than.
Jennifer, sorry, let me pause your time real quick. We have a list of folks also signed up for the tree code recommendation, so I want to make sure to respect that when we get to that, we want to go in order for that recommendation. Are you able to continue to speak to the temporarily modifying residential land use review process standards?
Yeah, I just wanted to just kind of finally add the fact that, you know, I find that both on the city and state level, the opportunity for community to weigh in on decisions that impact us is such a valued opportunity. And, you know, to lessen those opportunities with the intention to kind of speed up development, I think that I can understand the end goal of increasing supply, but as I spoke before, that I think also utilizing existing resources and partnerships with housing that is already available, but perhaps better utilizing it is also a way to meet the end goal of increasing the supply of housing that's needed for all different communities, including the houseless communities. So I think that that's my conclusion, is that the opportunity for communities that are most affected to continue to be able to weigh in on the process is so valuable, and I think would lead us to making better decisions around housing. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. And I've got you on the list for the tree codes.
Great.
Okay, next person signed up is Jonathan Balkema.
Hello, I'll be really quick. The only, reading through the proposal, the only suggestion I'd have is towards the bottom of that first paragraph section, where it says to provide guaranteed approval. Unfortunately, you know, it's really hard for government to guarantee an approval. It may, in the concept of it being land use, it might be more beneficial and more clear of what your intent is, which is provide a guaranteed decision within the 120 days. Because obviously if it's a bad plan or a bad design or in violation of the development codes, we can't approve it. So that might be a worthwhile suggestion. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, next up we have Ariel Nelson, who I don't see. So we move to folks who have their hands raised. Representative Gamba.
Sorry, it didn't unraise after the last time.
No problem. Okay, with that, we have concluded testimony on temporarily modifying residential land use review process standards. We'll now move to the next recommendation: prohibit suspension of plan review for residential development due to private utility design delays. And the first person that we have up, Amy Pepper.
Thank you again for allowing me to speak. First of all, I want to recognize that as an industry, we have seen significant design delays from the private utility companies. However, the proposal to suspend plan review for residential development for these private utility companies is fraught with disaster. It is important for us as we design and plan for all infrastructure that the power and cable that serves our new residents is a component of that plan review. That assures that there is not conflicts between fire hydrants, utility vaults, streetlights, etc. All of that needs to happen at the same time. I don't have a recommendation, but I would recommend that there would probably be different language geared towards encouraging the private utility companies to meet some plan times. That's all I have, and I just want to say that given the number of comments on the local tree codes, if I have signed up to testify, you can remove my name. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Amy. Right, and the next person we've got up is Jonathan. Welcome.
Hi, so just a quick comment on this one. I observed this work group and when this was talked about, and it seemed like a lot of it was sort of going around the franchise utilities or the PUE type utilities. And I think it could be misconstrued the way it's written if we had situations where private industry was providing the water supply or where there is other elements. You could conceive we have a couple areas that we still use septics. So that's private company utilities where obviously from a building code or plumbing code perspective, I have to make sure that those sanitary, the energy is actually able to be provided. We actually did have a large townhome project that has been sitting ready to be occupied for a year because Pacific Power wasn't able to get them served. So there are times that, yes, the delay, while painful, can be a good thing because we need at least basic understanding that yes, the utilities that are providing those services can provide those services to meet building code requirements and those sorts of things also. But so that's it.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Next up, we have Daryl Nelson, not on the webinar. So if anyone else would like to testify on this recommendation, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands, we will go ahead and move to the next recommendation, which is modifying housing appeals land use procedures. The only person we have signed up is not here. So are there any individuals who'd like to raise their hand on this recommendation? Okay, no hands. So we will move to the next recommendation, modify hearing time standards. Again, the only person we have signed up doesn't look like they're here. If you'd like to testify, go ahead and raise your hand. Seeing no hands, we'll move to the next recommendation.
Matthew? Sorry to interrupt you. Is it okay if I say something? I'd like to actually kind of ask a question of the people testifying to help us if we're going to make some adjustments. And I don't know if that's okay.
That's
So, well, I'll try to speak loudly so everybody can hear me, and because in the interest of trying to come back with, as Damian said, something that is a change when we come back to this. I spent the morning at Metro going through urban growth forecasting, and one of the interesting concepts that a lot of people don't understand, and I'll try to be really quick here, is that Metro goes through and figures out what their growth capacity is in their regions for growth and development. Primarily building infill small workforce housing on lots. We do run across a lot of tree code issues where we want to put up a 3-plex or a 4-plex on one small lot, and no amount of creative design can protect a tree that's in the middle of a small lot. That lot has been counted by Portland and Metro as a lot that should be built for growth. So as we're thinking about this, I guess my question is, are there people that think that we should have a tree codes that prohibit growth and development of lots with smaller lots with trees on them? And if so, should we be considering asking cities to recalculate their growth forecasts and capacity to not count those lots as buildable? And I know that's a complex question, but I guess it's because right now we kind of feel like we have it two ways, is we're counting those lots as buildable and saying, let's build on them, but we're also saying, if there's a large tree on them, don't build on them. So I'm trying to figure, I'd like to hear from anybody who's willing to say, I'd just like to hear if anybody has thoughts on that.
Great. Okay, so on the modify allowable standards for local tree codes, the first person signed up is Meryl Reddish, who I don't see on webinar. So if you're under a different name, please raise your hand. All right, the next person, Lynn Ford, who I also don't see, but raise your hand if you're under a different name. Next, Jacob Appenese.
Hi there. Thanks for letting me speak. I'm happy to add extra comment to like the dichotomy between housing development and tree codes, but I'll first give my own testimony and then if I had extra time, I'll respond to that question. Anyway, so for the record, my name is Jacob Appenese. I'm a lifelong resident of Portland who has lived in the southwest, southeast, north, and northeast quadrants of the city. I'm a renter living in a 3-bedroom home near Alberta Street with 4 other housemates. I'm concerned by the recent recommendation to suspend nearly all tree protection codes statewide in order to further housing production. The reason for my concern is pretty simple. The environmental harm caused from this recommendation is too great. Trees are essential city infrastructure. They offer shade that keeps neighbors and neighborhoods cool. When the 2021 heat dome came through Portland, most who perished were living in areas with little to no tree canopy. Future studies would name this phenomenon the urban heat island effect. Trees also reduce harmful pollutants by filtering air. They also enhance community economic stability, reduce vehicle travel speeds, bring both physical and mental health benefits, conserve water, reduce soil erosion. The list just goes on. Like any other Portland resident, I want to help us out of our housing crisis. Thousands of my neighbors remain on the streets, our addiction crisis is worsening, and my rent is rising. That's why I advocate for solutions that will help us create housing abundance, zoning changes to allow apartments everywhere, public and cooperative housing funding, construction workforce training, and streamlined permitting processes are all things that will allow Oregon to build the hundreds of thousands of homes that are needed in our state. Removing a couple of tree codes may develop some housing, but it neglects our equally pressing climate crisis. Maybe this kind of code can be revisited when urban tree canopies are healthy, when areas like Outer East Portland have canopies as strong as their most affluent neighborhoods, and when cities have plans to grow and maintain trees in the public right of way. But until those issues are resolved, shredding tree codes into cheap kindling will make cities much less resilient to the climate crisis without doing much to solve it. Thanks. I don't know if I actually have any extra comments for the question from Metro, but I will say that it makes sense to me that if a tree is huge and it currently makes it impossible to build on that lot, that it shouldn't be considered a lot to be developed on. So that's my one comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Jacob.
Go ahead. I just to make sure I'm understanding this. There's a piece of testimony here about Portland Street Code that says it doesn't apply to residential lots 5,000 square feet or smaller. Do you know if that's correct?
Portland Street Code is lots under 5,000 square feet, not 5,000 square feet.
So
that's a big delineation because most of Portland is 5,000 square foot lots are bigger.
And we're talking about 6,000 square feet.
Which is what Salem currently is 6,000 square feet. So where that's kind of, we came up with 6,000, which would incorporate a lot of smaller lots in Portland.
Both of the testimonies Portland centric, correct, even though I'm in committee just talking about other jurisdictions, but the impact on Portland would be going from 5,000 square feet to 6,000 square feet.
4,999, 6,000 square feet, correct?
Okay.
Thank you, yeah.
And that 6,000 square foot threshold was meant to say that if you have a large lot, you can do what
You can design it, yeah.
You can design around the street.
Thank you for those clarifications. Appreciate it. Thank you for your testimony, Jacob. Who we got next, Matt?
Okay, next we've got Diane Meisenhelter, who I don't see. So raise your hand if you're under a different name. Okay. Next, after that is Noelle Studer, who I don't see, so raise your hand. Next is Todd Prager, who I also don't see, so raise your hand if you're under a different name. Next is Dan Pauly.
Good afternoon again. So I'll keep this short. I mean, you have hundreds of pages to read on this one, but I just want to highlight that the city's Wilsonville has had a tree code since the late 90s. That one of the key phrases in there that I want you to remember is we consider tree preservation as a design element equal with other design elements. And that served us well for decades. And just as you do this, please don't break what's already working down here. And that we've been able to, I've seen mature white oaks cut out for homes, but we've also seen some creative designs around trees where it's appropriate. So there is a way to balance it. And this is an important topic, and just we need to be careful about how we apply this statewide, because there are different considerations across different jurisdictions across the state. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Right, next we have Amy Pepper.
Thank you. I will pass on providing additional testimony and just have you refer to our written testimony. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Amy. Next, Theodora Songus, who I don't see on. Raise your hand if you're under a different name. Great. Then we've got Nikki from Foster Trees LLC. I don't see a Nikki on. Raise your hand if you're under a different name. Next is Laura Feldman, who I don't see. Next is Corey Harlan. See Corey, so raise your hand if you're under a different name. Next is Lisa Irene. Raise your hand if you're under a different name. All right, Lynn Hanlon.
Hello. Yeah, so yes, I testified earlier about the other thing. And it's a bummer that all those people that were here last time, that a lot of them couldn't make it this time. So sorry you missed out on their testimony. You may not be sorry, I don't know. We need more healthy, affordable housing, not hot boxes in increased heat islands, which is what some of these tree codes are. It's where the gutting of the tree codes is heading. And it's deadly. I work and play and exist in outer Southeast Portland. And it's not good. People who live in low-income housing need shade. And it's becoming increasingly more important as the climate heats. And we need creative solutions to have more low and middle income housing that integrates climate resilience into the housing projects. If and when there's increased costs for low income housing because of issues around trees, perhaps the state can help with funding to find better solutions, but not for high-end projects. Planting new trees is great, but it takes decades to replace shade and water absorption qualities of mature trees, and we don't have decades. The climate crisis is here. People died in Portland and other parts of Oregon during the heat dome because of a lack of shade, especially in my part of town. Where I worked, we were very much impacted, and I had a dental emergency during the heat dome, and I had to be on Division Street, and it was like the little bit of time I had to spend going in and out of the car and being there was really hard. I consider all the people who live in that area who are waiting for buses and trying to get to their groceries and stuff. And it was just horrific because it's a giant heat island because more trees have been removed from there. Outer Southeast the trees are falling just way too fast because of public projects and because of housing projects, lots of them. And this is just going to put the gas on and make that so much worse. And we can't afford it. We need more life-giving shade. And last time I was here, somebody on this council said you can have trees or housing, but not both. This is obviously a demonstration of the fact that you need more people there who understand that you can have both, especially large form mature trees. And we need the life-giving shade, but also mature trees help with flooding, and flooding is going to become more and more of a problem as the climate heats, as you all know. So gutting the tree codes is going to be really dangerous for all, as well as just a really bad idea. So I think it's time to find better solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Lynn. Hey, Matt, just for Daniel, I want to make a clarification of this. Another thing that's been in a lot of the testimony, and I've heard a lot of comments about outer Southeast not having a lot of trees, and I've even seen articles in the Oregonian about outer Southeast not having a lot of trees. For the record, outer Southeast, pretty much everything east of 205, there's hardly any 6,000 square foot lots there. Anybody who knows Southeast, those are all 10, 20, 30,000 square foot lots from when they annexed into Portland. So almost all the lots east of 205 wouldn't even be impacted by this recommendation. So I feel that's important for people in outer Southeast to recognize. So.
Okay. Next up, Brenna Bell. Raise your hand. Okay. Next is Reggie Frumkin. Next, Jennifer Kane.
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to speak in support of Jacob Apney's testimony, as well as Daniel Polly, related to the consideration of trees on lots that are less than 6,000 square feet. And also considering trees not only as a design element that is of equal importance to anything else, but also considering the fact that, as Lynn had spoken about, trees take decades, between 10 and 40 years at least, for it to grow to maturity. And so having a tree code that makes it much easier to cut down these trees without a lot of repercussions, I think is something that collectively is a really maybe a short-sighted decision. And again, as I spoke about, pitting these two issues against each other as opposed to being able to address it concurrently and creatively together with all of the partners and community input, I think will do a lot to be able to come up with creative solutions that can address these two really important issues. Thank you so much.
Jennifer. Albert Kaufman.
Hey there, everyone. This is quite a big group you have here. I'm Albert Kaufman. I am representing a group called We Keep Trees Standing. And you may not be surprised to know that our group of folks is very much interested in strengthening our tree codes rather than weakening them. The gentleman who just spoke a moment ago talking about lot sizes east of 205, I'm not quite sure that that's accurate, but I don't think it really matters. I mean, all you have to do is look at the news from today in New York City to see what the effect is of cutting down large form trees. It basically just leads to flooding being worse than ever. If you imagine such a rainfall here in Portland or in Oregon in general, we're looking at something similar that could very likely happen here. I recommend that the tree codes be enforced, strengthened. If it were up to me, I would not have any trees cut down. I'd work around all trees. And really, if we want to talk about having a housing crisis, in 2 minutes, you could solve it by shutting down Vacasa, VRBO, and Airbnb. You really want to provide some housing. We don't need to build 36,000 units. There's way more than 36,000 units sitting around the state that are vacant right now. So that's, I think, a lot of baloney, especially given all the commercial real estate that's out there that's sitting vacant. If we got creative, we could solve this housing crisis tomorrow. In addition to that, it looks to me like people are leaving Multnomah County, at least. And so I would wonder if that's even really something that we should be considering. It looks like we're also about to start planting trees en masse. Thank you, President Biden, for the $1 billion that's going towards planting trees around the country in urban areas to deal with a lot of the effects that Lynn just talked about a moment ago. I really enjoyed her testimony, and I hope that you all take that to heart. This idea of making it easier to cut down trees, I think, is foolish. I think the work that was just recently done along Powell, where 570 Doug firs were cut down, how we didn't figure out how to work around those trees just baffles me. It makes me sad for Oregon to watch that kind of activity happening without any kind of thought. And I hope you all will really strongly consider keeping trees standing. It's necessary. It's necessary for you, and it's been necessary for your grandchildren and their grandchildren. Think about 7 generations when you chop a tree down.
Thank you, Albert.
Thank you, Albert.
Okay. Next, Brooke Bach. If you're under a different name, please raise your hand. Thank you, Brooke Batchelor.
Hi, my name is Dr. Brooke Batchelor. I'm a family physician in Portland and Beaverton. I've dedicated my life's work to protecting the health of our communities, and I'm really concerned after reading the proposed changes to tree codes. I come to you to share some information and to ask for 3 key requests today. This is not just an afterthought. This is a priority topic that deserves each committee member's attention, care, and effort to get right. As a physician, I feel obligated to lift up the health benefits of trees. There's an emerging evidence that trees reduce stress, anxiety, depression, and prevalence of violence in communities, and improve air quality. Not to mention their benefits for climate change. This is a now problem, not a later problem. My requests are to decrease the threshold diameter of trees that will be protected to less than 21 inches. Consider protections for urban unincorporated areas. Do not allow developers to take down trees or to simply just plant young trees to replace old trees, and better tree code enforcement. So for the threshold of diameter of trees, currently listed, you have 48 inches diameter tree, but this eliminates protections for nearly all trees. Trees approaching this size can be more than 300 years old. Federal guidelines have protections for trees with a diameter greater than 21 inches, because recent research shows that those trees really hold 42% of carbon. So really, there's no rational basis for 48 inches. And some trees grow slower, like our native Oregon oak, a tree that provides significant environmental benefits. So diameter alone is really not a great way to go to determine what will be protected and what won't. Also, please don't forget protections for urban unincorporated areas such as mine in Washington County. I keep seeing a bunch of trees taken down at an alarming rate. They're huge, and we really need better opportunities for the public to engage in these decisions before they're cut down. Also, young trees do not equal old trees. Consider adding some incentives for developers to protect trees, not just take them down, by being able to easily pay a fee. We also need better tree code enforcement. So overall, in closing, there are many ways to build that are inclusive of tree protections. You could invite an arborist or architect who successfully developed in this way that prioritizes tree protections to be on your committee and to add some of those more granular details and really environmental protections didn't cause a housing crisis. We need solutions that both advance housing and create healthier, more climate resilient urban landscapes. And I also share the concern that others have raised of the lack of environmental group representation on the HPAC. Many of these current climate committee recommendations would clearly cause harm to the health of our local communities and state. And many of these recommendations prioritize profit, which should never supersede essential human rights, and they're unethical. I urge us to choose a different path now to provide better protections for trees at this critical climate juncture. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. Okay, next is Angela Northness. We don't see. Jan Zuckerman.
Hi, thanks for listening to me again. And I agree with Jacob and Daniel and Jennifer and many of the other, and the person that I just heard, the things that they just said. 2 weeks ago, before the public had a chance to weigh in on the tree code recommendations, like Lynn said, Daniel stated that trees must be sacrificed for housing. I'm not ignorant to the fact that trees are cut down for development. Of course they are. What was missing from this simple announcement was the complexity of the cumulative impact on shade equity and livability in an effort to further dismantle an already weak tree code in the name of affordable housing. Several years ago, I supported the Portland Youth Climate Council in their 2 years of work to strengthen the tree code by ensuring that higher mitigation fees for development continue for trees over 36 inches and to remove exemptions for commercial and industrial lands. Despite our efforts and those of many organizations and thousands of community members, heavy industry continues to be exempt until the economic opportunities analysis is completed, which is already years delayed. The impact of this decision on the Willamette River, its salmon and neighboring communities, neighborhoods, houses, apartments is easy to see. History tells us that exemptions are never short-term and that short-term fixes cause long-term chronic problems. Before I was even aware of shade inequity in Portland, a friend of mine visited me who suffers from lupus. She was unable to be in the hot sun. We walked to meet my kids for breakfast one morning, and once we left the shade of my neighborhood, which is inner Northeast in Irvington, we found ourselves running sometimes for several blocks at a time to find any shade cover because of the lack of street furnishing and trees. The difference in temperature was astonishing, and the clear and present danger to her health was frightening. In fact, it should be frightening to us all that we would purposely weaken an already weak tree code to cut costs for housing when the cooling, shade, energy saving, carbon capturing, air quality, moisture retaining benefits of trees should be a given with any new housing, and even more so if we want to address the housing and climate resilience, especially for our underserved populations. The root cause of our housing crisis is not the trees. Under our current tree code, you know that trees are not protected. Developers can simply pay fees to remove trees rather than preserve them. The short-sighted approach to do away with permits and fees in the name of affordable housing, which is not even guaranteed, is a clear giveaway to developers who already have influenced every environmental regulation in our city and state. While this might save money in the short term, the cost to Oregon's environmental legacy is profound, and our communities across Oregon will pay the price in the long term. Rather than seeing trees as barriers, it's time we see them as critical infrastructure, just like housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Next up is Casey Clapp, who I don't see. And then we've got Rick Till.
Just time numbers check.
Rick, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thanks for the opportunity to comment. My name is Rick Till. I'm a board certified master arborist working in Portland for a commercial tree care company. And in that work, I have prepared or helped prepare hundreds of tree protection plans for small urban lots. We most of the time we're able to figure out ways to build houses and retain trees on site. The biggest barrier I've encountered is one, developers not contacting an attorney early enough in the process to design around trees. Too often, we encounter builders that already have set plans and then contact an arborist trying to figure out a way to build their dream project rather than start early enough to create creative solutions. Second, just one second. Second is the cost barrier to alternative construction techniques and the knowledge of how to implement those to retain trees. I've got a lot of examples of building on piers and grade beams to bridge roots and build ADUs and new development on small urban lots. That knowledge and the cost barriers to implementing those needs to be spread wider throughout the community. If the committee wants to support those solutions, one idea would be to fund the Oregon Department of Forestry Urban and Community Forestry Assistance Program to have arborists work, to have consulting arborists work with permitting agencies and in the field arborists to provide better guidance to developers, then also support the labor force in learning better construction techniques that can accommodate large trees on site. With respect to Metro's inventories of buildable land, I would like to see the data on how many large trees are actually prohibiting development on lots. In my experience, it's a very small fraction of the buildable lands in the inventory within the Metro region. Yeah, so actually get some data to rely to base the prediction off of. Yeah, I think that's it for now. I would encourage you to seek input from expert arborists with experience in this matter. We have a lot of knowledge in the community. We're ready and willing to support new housing development, but this blanket prohibition of for 48-inch trees and less does not seem workable and is going to be a huge detriment to the community. Thank you for your time, and thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Okay, so that is everyone who signed up. So we're going to do a time check just because of how much time we've got left in the meeting. Please raise your hand right now if you would also like to testify on this item.
We've
got 3 more.
And then what do we have for the workforce?
4, so we'll probably get to the workforce the next meeting.
Okay. Does that work for everybody? We may have to put us on, get through the trees and then the off. See if not, I thank you both. Appreciate it.
Great, so we'll move to the last 3 people. If you are here to testify on workforce shortages, unfortunately, since we're running out of time, we will carry that recommendation over to the next meeting, and we will have public testimony at the next meeting on October the 13th. So we'll go into the last 3 folks testifying on the tree code recommendation. First up, Jonathan.
Just one thought to help appease everybody's concern is instead of the blanket approach, you might consider setting it up to the point where you can't to achieve what you're going for. Maybe it's you have to demonstrate that you can't provide some number. You guys throw in the number, a 2,000 square foot building pad outside the root system or something like that. So that way it's not every tree can be offed. It's you can't get a physical house on that size lot. That might be a way to help balance the people's concerns.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next, Bonnie McKinley.
Hello, can you hear me?
Sound great.
Hey, great. Bonnie McKinley here. I do support many of the statements that have been made today, and I urge this commission to review today's heartfelt and well-researched comments. I had the privilege to teach children in Oregon's public schools for 30 years. I live in Portland. We have an active tree code. I am deeply concerned about the lack of affordable housing and am grateful for the governor's commitment to solve this problem. Close your eyes. When visualizing Oregon's largest city, we see a lush bounty of trees. Because of my growing awareness of the climate crisis, I have not taken a flight anywhere for almost 20 years, yet I still have verdant memories of the plane's descent back to my favorite city. Oh, green, oh, beautiful green city, so lush in the spring and summers, and thanks to the preponderance of conifers throughout the entire year, except in those neighborhoods where there is not a rich supply of urban tree growth. Please pay attention to the research of the nationally recognized geographer and PSU professor Vivek Shandis. Pay attention as he clearly makes the case for an increase in the urban tree canopy in our emerging age of record-breaking summer heat temperatures. The proposal of altering Portland's tree code and the state's brings horror to my heart. What about your heart? What about your practical mind? Can it think about a city with fewer expansive soaring trees? What about the natural carbon sequestration that the larger mature trees readily supply? Are you prepared to trade a slapdash housing boom for the hundreds of years of trees growing and gracing our state's identity? A solitary tree on the license plate is not enough. With reasoned management, we can have trees and housing for the people of Oregon. Enact nothing that will alter Portland's or the state's precious tree codes. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Okay. Our last person, Ethan Nelson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ethan Nelson. I'm the City of Eugene's Intergovernmental Relations Manager. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I've attended a lot of the subgroup meetings, and I think that you've heard some of the testimony I've provided in the past. And at the last meeting, I submitted testimony requesting that legislative leadership would consider having a city representative appointed to this body. And I think that this the tree code item is an example of why that would be advantageous for the process to move more effectively and efficiently. And so particularly on page 4 of the document of the tree code recommendation, where question 3, it says to assess the issue and potential actions. And in the statement, there's upon testimony from the City of Salem, City of Portland, and the City of Springfield, it was determined that 60 inches was too high of a threshold, and a very small percentage of trees 60 or more. And then it says, upon hearing the feedback from the SMEs, the work group agreed to lower the suggested threshold for trees to 48 inches. And so what my concern is, and what I guess I would speak upon, is to say that having been in that actual hearing, there was a lot more conversation that was provided and input that was provided related to the process by which municipalities adopt tree codes and the public participation and the data and the findings of fact that are all provided to then create a tree code that is advancing the multiple objectives that have been outlined by the community. And so I'd encourage that in this process, a number of different recommendations could be better supported by having more of those findings of fact, more of that process by having municipalities heavily engaged in the development. For the tree code specifically, I think a number of local tree codes are around 12 inches. And so when the discussion was started at 60, moved to 48, and there was really no discussion about what's the data behind why that reduction of 12 inches and the difference between 48 and 12 would kind of work in a community. And so I really encourage you all to think about that. And lastly, a process question is that I've been hearing that these recommendations will go to the governor and she ultimately will decide. But in the same page that I referenced at the end of that section, it says, we ultimately did not include those in this recommendation, but included the comments for when the recommendation is put before the legislature. And so many cities are very concerned about process when there's not clarity about how the HPAC is operating. And so I thank you for your time, and we'll look forward to continue to work with the HPAC.
Thank you. And yeah, just to answer your last question, for you and the other members of the public, the recommendation report does go to the governor, and she'll decide which recommendations to move forward and which not to move forward, and the legislature will make their own decisions. So thank you for being here. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you, everybody. So like we discussed, we'll move the workforce forward is the modified standards for apprentice ratios and construction trades. That was the licenses into the next meeting on October 13th for the second reading. With that, it puts us into our last item, which is next steps. Get back to that.
Next steps. Well, I will say that you're coming up on things of the year. So I know there are a lot of recommendations in process, primarily on the finance group. So please get those as soon as possible. We have I believe four meetings scheduled, and I can't remember all the dates. But the next meeting is October the 13th. It'll be a virtual meeting. I think that in order to get things through the process, you're going to need to get your recommendations in, at least for that initial reading, by the end of October. So please do get those wrapped up, because we'll need to make sure we have our three-step process, and then we have some time where we can schedule some meetings. So that's all for me.
And just as a reminder, I mean, we are coming up to the end of the time for our assignment budget for December, but obviously we have holidays and things there that keeps everybody busy. So we will make sure that we get as much work done now as we can for the next few weeks. So we really going into procedural stuff by the end of November, getting some stuff through second and third readings through November and early December. As well as lots of, I mean, the reports due at the end of December. So we also have some work after. And it's all adopted to actually pull it all together by over Christmas New Year. So it'll keep us all busy.
I think first thing you get for sidewalk is if we have the SMEs testify the date for visually or something, so that we can really get out this is separate.
So we, depending on the amount of work and the amount of folks signing up for testimony, we are going to be maybe reaching out to you about additional meetings. And once we stopped scheduling them so far in advance, we can attend, making sure that we have quorum and all those types of things for our special meetings. We anticipate we still haven't caught up for testimony for all the second round items that we had on the last agenda. That being said, we know that it is particular recommendations that are garnering a lot of attention. And once we get through those, we have a pretty steady, handful of people that care about any particular recommendation other than a couple of them. So not clear exactly how it's going to go, but we're going to be nimble, and we're going to be communicating about how much we need to meet and how we're going to do that in order to get through all the recommendations that we have on our plate.
I just like the in-person, everybody gets to hear it. I travel far.
Margaret.
To make it worth Riley's time, could we do a longer work session potentially? I mean, I know that's hard, but maybe it might be easier to just, give ourselves a little bit longer, work block to get through some. Just I want to encourage that could be on the table.
Absolutely. We can take a talk. When I was on ODOT, we'd have all day meetings and we'd have a lunch break. But it's a long day. They're trying and swap.
Well, I know.
I know, yeah. So we'll have a conversation about that, see, because I think it probably preference to have more meetings than longer meetings, I think, but we'll have to figure out.
If we had in-person meetings, those we could they focus on.
Like, yeah,
and handle the testimony.
I agree, because I think, well, especially the last couple of meetings, they'll be almost entirely third readings, giving us the final up and the final, because we'll have one final vote to kind of finalize all the recommendations. And so, I mean, we can have a conversation about whether we want to have that in person. I'm this estimating that's in December, which is right in the middle of holiday season. So that's and travel.
We got it.
That's not happening for anybody.
I think on that, meeting adjourned. Thank you both.